You're now entering open space, a place of mystery, truth, and untold stories. Like and subscribe if you're ready for what's coming. Scout stood on the edge of the small town park, his sharp eyes scanning the quiet streets. Though retired from the force, his instincts had never dulled. A screech of tires broke the calm. A black van sped by, and in its tinted windows, Scout saw a terrified child's face. His ears perked up. Something wasn't right. Like and subscribe if you're ready for what's coming. Without hesitation, Scout took off after the van, paws pounding the pavement. People watched in confusion as the dog weaved through traffic with uncanny precision. He wasn't just chasing, he was calculating. Years of training kicked in. He knew the pattern. He needed to find out where that van would go. Scout lost sight of the van, but didn't panic. He sniffed the air, catching a trail. The scent was unfamiliar but strong: fear, motor oil, and something metallic. He followed it down a back alley, ears twitching at every sound. The city suddenly felt larger, colder. But Scout didn't stop. Further down the alley, Scout froze. A greasy rag smelling of chloroform lay crumpled beside a dropped toy. He gently nudged it, recognizing the child's scent. The trail was fresh. Whoever they were, they'd stopped here. Maybe watched him. He growled low. Someone was close. A shadow moved above. Scout's ears twitched. On a nearby fire escape, a man watched him, then darted away. Scout barked sharply, the sound echoing off the walls. He gave chase, claws scraping metal as he leapt onto a dumpster. The man was fast, but Scout had hunted worse. The man vanished into a warehouse. Scout slowed, approaching the rusted door cautiously. The scent trail was stronger now. He sniffed the cracks, ears flicking. Then a creak inside. Scout lowered his body, ready to strike. He wasn't just a dog, he was justice on four legs. Inside, the warehouse reeked of chemicals and gasoline. Scout padded silently between old crates, his nose low to the ground. A loud bang startled pigeons into flight. He didn't flinch. Instead, he found a torn sleeve, child-sized. He was on the right track. Scout froze. Voices echoed through the rafters. Two men argued about the package and the money. Scout slinked into the shadows, ears turning like radar. One of them kicked a crate. He was angry. The other mentioned moving it before sunrise. Scout memorized every word. The men left, slamming a side door. Scout crept toward where they'd stood. A trapdoor lay slightly open. Beneath it, a faint whimper. Scout scratched at it, barked once, then twice. From below came a small, trembling voice. "Help!" Scout's eyes narrowed. He'd found the child. Scout barked louder. Someone was coming. He stood protectively over the trapdoor, teeth bared. A flashlight beam swept in. The man from earlier froze as Scout lunged, snarling. Years of training exploded in motion. He brought him down in seconds. The child was safe. For now. Scout stood guard until backup arrived. Officers flooded the warehouse. One bent down to check the trapdoor. A girl, maybe 6 years old, crawled out, bruised, scared, but alive. She looked at Scout and whispered, "Thank you, doggy." Scout didn't wag his tail. He just watched, alert, ready. Detective Moore knelt beside Scout, placing a hand gently on his back. "Good work, partner," he murmured. Scout looked up, then toward the door. Moore understood. The job wasn't done. Not yet. Somewhere, someone was still pulling the strings. Scout could feel it. The next morning, Moore and Scout reviewed security footage. A man in a ski mask had led the child into the building 2 nights ago. But behind him, barely visible, another figure. Scout growled at the screen. He'd seen those eyes before. Cold, calculating. Um, that night, they returned to the scene. Scout led Moore behind the warehouse to a hidden entrance. Paw prints, cigarette butts. Someone had watched everything. A mole in the department. Moore looked uneasy. Scout sniffed a badge left in the dirt. Fresh. Moore called it in. Badge number 621. That's Carter. His voice trailed off. Carter had gone missing 3 days ago. Scout growled. Low. Moore felt it too. This wasn't just a kidnapping, it was bigger, organized. Someone was silencing the truth. Moore stared at the badge in silence. Carter was investigating internal affairs, he whispered. Scout sat still, ears perked. The pieces were falling into place. If Carter was silenced, someone inside didn't want the truth exposed. This went beyond one case. Back at the precinct, Moore pulled Carter's files. Um, Scout lay beside the desk, tail flicking. Dozens of redacted documents, a pattern of officers reassigned or gone missing. Scout's nose twitched at one file. Moore looked closer. Connections to a private security firm. They drove out to the firm's listed address. A warehouse again. Scout barked once, low and sharp. Moore pulled his weapon. We're not alone. Inside crates lined the walls. One had a false bottom. Scout scratched at it. Moore opened it. Cash, phones, IDs. Moore snapped photos. Evidence of human trafficking, he muttered. Scout paced, uneasy. Footsteps echoed. Moore signaled Scout to hide. 2 men entered. Shipment's late. One grunted. Boss won't like that. Moore recorded everything. Scout's growl stayed silent. When the men left, Moore and Scout emerged. We just walked into a trafficking ring, Moore said grimly. Scout sniffed at a discarded jacket. Chemical traces. Explosives? We need out now. A timer beeped. Moore's eyes widened. Run, Scout. They sprinted out of the warehouse, the sound of the timer echoing in Moore's ears. Scout led the way, darting through alleyways. Moore could hear footsteps behind them. This isn't over, Moore muttered. The sound of a distant siren grew louder. They reached Moore's car, but before they could get in, 2 black SUVs screeched to a halt. Masked men jumped out, weapons raised. Don't move, one of them barked. Scout growled, positioning himself between Moore and the armed men. A voice shouted from behind them, Get down! A bullet flew by Moore's head. A second voice shouted, Move! Move now! Scout lunged at one of the men, knocking him off balance. Moore fired, the shots ringing out. The attackers scattered, retreating into the shadows. Moore checked the injured man. This won't end until we expose them, Moore said, wiping sweat from his brow. Scout sniffed the ground, following a trail. Let's finish this, Moore added. Moore and Scout followed the trail to an abandoned building on the edge of the city. The door creaked open, revealing an empty room with a single chair in the center. They're expecting us, Moore muttered. Scout's hackles rose. Moore's hand gripped his gun tighter as they moved further into the building. The air was thick with dust, and the silence was deafening. Scout stopped abruptly, ears twitching. They're here, Moore whispered. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed from the hallway. A shadow moved quickly across the wall. Moore raised his gun, but it was too late. Two men appeared, blocking the exit. "You're not going anywhere," one of them sneered. Scout growled and lunged at the nearest man, knocking him into a pile of crates. Moore ducked, narrowly avoiding a bullet that slammed into the wall next to him. He fired back, hitting one of the men in the shoulder. "Get down," he shouted at Scout. The dog immediately rolled behind a stack of crates, barking furiously. The remaining attacker rushed forward, aiming at Moore. Scout, quick as ever, leaped and tackled the man to the ground. Moore's shot rang out, hitting the man's leg. He fell with a yell, clutching his wound. "It's over," Moore said, breathing heavily. With the immediate threat neutralized, Moore checked his surroundings. "We're clear," he said, but his eyes were still scanning every corner. Scout sniffed the air, alert for any hidden danger. "Let's find the truth," Moore added, motioning towards the door. Moore slowly approached the door, his senses heightened. Scout, as always, was a few steps ahead, scanning the surroundings. The door creaked open, revealing a dimly lit room filled with files and documents. "This is it," Moore whispered, stepping inside. Scout's ears perked up, and he moved cautiously as if sensing the importance of what lay ahead. Inside the room, Moore scanned the scattered documents. "This is what we need," he muttered, grabbing a folder. Scout sniffed the papers and whined as if warning him. Moore raised an eyebrow, but didn't question it. He looked at the folder, realizing it held the key to the mystery. "Let's go," he said, heading for the door. As they exited the building, Moore heard the sound of a car engine starting. "We're not alone," he said, scanning the street. Scout growled low, his posture tense. A black car was parked down the block, its engine running. Moore motioned for Scout to stay low. "Get ready," he whispered. The car slowly drove off, and Moore and Scout followed at a distance, and the streets of the city were eerily quiet, and the only sounds were the faint hum of the car's engine. Moore's eyes narrowed, and he motioned for Scout to stay back. The chase had begun, and there was no turning back. They followed the car for miles until it finally stopped in front of a warehouse. Moore and Scout hid behind some crates, watching the figures step out of the car. "This is where it ends," Moore whispered, feeling the weight of the moment. Scout's ears were perked, ready for action. Moore looked at Scout. "Stay close," he whispered, his voice low. The figures in front of the warehouse were moving toward the building. Moore kept his eyes on them, every instinct telling him to stay hidden. Scout, still tense, watched the men carefully, ears swiveling. Every muscle in his body was coiled, ready to spring into action at the slightest command. The men entered the warehouse, and Moore motioned for Scout to follow. They moved silently, staying in the shadows. As they neared the entrance, Moore felt his heart rate quicken. He looked down at Scout, who was calmly walking beside him as if he knew this was their moment. It was now or never. They slipped inside, unnoticed by the men. The warehouse was dark and smelled of old wood and metal. Moore quickly surveyed the room, spotting crates stacked high in the corners. He motioned for Scout to stay low. Every step felt like a risk, but they had no choice now. They had to find out what was going on inside. They reached a small office at the back of the warehouse. The door was slightly ajar. Moore motioned for Scout to stay behind him as he slowly pushed the door open. Inside, there was a desk cluttered with papers and a computer. He was just about to inspect it when a noise from behind startled him. A figure emerged from the shadows and more quickly reached for his gun. But before he could react, Scout lunged forward, barking furiously. The figure froze, eyes wide in shock. "Who are you?" Moore demanded, his voice steady despite the tension in the air. Scout stood firm, guarding his partner. The figure raised its hands slowly, signaling that he wasn't a threat. "I'm not here to hurt anyone," he said, his voice shaky. Moore kept his gun aimed at him, but his eyes flickered towards Scout, who had stopped barking but was still on alert. The tension in the room was thick. Moore wasn't convinced yet. "Then why are you here?" Moore asked, his voice still firm. The man hesitated before answering, his eyes darting around the room nervously. I I was hired to keep an eye on something here," he said, his voice still trembling. "But I didn't know it was illegal?" Moore narrowed his eyes. This wasn't making sense. Scout, sensing the change in the atmosphere, moved slightly closer to Moore, his body tense. "Who hired you?" Moore demanded, stepping forward. The man recoiled slightly, still nervous. "I can't say," he replied. "They'll kill me if I talk." Moore's frustration grew. He needed answers, but this man wasn't giving him much to work with. Scout growled lowly, sensing the tension. Moore took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. Moore knew he wasn't going to get the truth from this man easily, but just then a noise echoed from outside the office. Moore's head snapped toward the door. Scout's ears pricked up and he looked towards the sound, tense and alert. "They're coming," Moore muttered, a sense of urgency in his voice. "We need to move." Uh, um, with Scout leading the way, they slipped out of the office and into the back hallway. Moore kept a firm grip on his weapon, his eyes scanning every corner. Um, Scout moved swiftly, his body low to the ground. He could sense the danger, and he was ready. As they moved toward the exit, Moore heard footsteps approaching from behind. Moore spun around, raising his weapon. Two figures emerged from the shadows, armed and moving fast. "Get down!" Moore shouted, pushing the nervous man to the ground. Scout barked fiercely, launching himself toward one of the attackers. The hallway erupted into chaos as bullets flew and shadows danced. Scout clamped his jaws on the attacker's arm, forcing him to drop his weapon. Moore fired twice, hitting the second man in the leg. He collapsed with a scream. The first attacker struggled under Scout's weight, but couldn't shake him off. "Stay down," Moore yelled, gun trained on both. With both attackers neutralized, Moore grabbed Scout's collar and pulled him back. "Good boy," he muttered, eyes still scanning. They had no time to waste. Moore turned to the man they rescued. "You're coming with us." "Now." The man nodded quickly, terrified. They moved quickly down the hallway, Moore in front, Scout close behind. The air was heavy with smoke and dust. Alarms blared faintly in the distance. Moore's mind raced. Who were these men? What were they guarding? There were too many questions and not enough time. They burst through a side door into the cold night. Moore scanned the alley, checking for threats. It was empty. "We need a car," he said, pulling out his phone. Scout stood still, his eyes scanning every shadow. The man they rescued shivered in the cold, still silent. A car screeched to a stop at the alley's mouth. Moore raised his weapon again, but relaxed when he saw Detective Harris behind the wheel. "Get in!" she shouted. Moore pushed the man forward and climbed in after him. Scout leapt into the back seat. "We got trouble," Moore said. Inside the car, Harris drove fast, weaving through narrow streets. You were supposed to wait for backup," she snapped. Moore kept his eyes on the road. Didn't have a choice. Scout sat between them, alert, ears perked. The rescued man stared out the window, lost in fear. Moore finally spoke. "They weren't just thugs, they were protecting something like a facility." Harris frowned. "A lab?" Moore nodded. "Or something worse." Scout growled softly, sensing tension. The rescued man trembled. They were experimenting on people," he whispered. The car fell silent. Only the hum of the engine and Scout's steady breathing filled the space. Harris gripped the wheel tighter. "We'll need evidence, real proof." Moore glanced back. "We've got a witness. Let's keep him alive." The man nodded slowly, terrified. Harris took a sharp turn and parked in a secluded garage beneath an old warehouse. "We're safe here, for now," she said. Moore opened the door, letting Scout out first. The garage was dark, cold, and silent. "Let's talk inside, quietly," Moore said. Inside the warehouse, dust floated in the air like ghosts. Harris led the group to a small office in the corner. Scout sniffed around before lying near the door. Moore shut the blinds. "We'll stay until it's safe." The rescued man clutched his arms, trembling. "They'll come for me." Moore poured water into a cracked cup and handed it to the man. "Start from the beginning." The man hesitated, then spoke. "They paid me to clean floors, but then they locked me in. I heard screams at night." Scout's ears twitched. Harris exchanged a look with Moore. The man's voice cracked. "They used the basement. Injections, wires, screaming. People were taken down, but never came back." Harris clenched her fists. "Why you?" The man shrugged. "Maybe a mistake?" Scout growled low. Moore stood. "We need to see that basement." Scout led the way as they returned to the car. The warehouse groaned around them. Moore helped the man into the back seat. Harris checked her weapon. "Let's get this over with." Scout barked once, as if agreeing. The night outside was still, too still. The drive back was quiet, heavy with what they'd heard. Scout didn't rest, eyes on the road ahead. Harris spoke low. "If he's telling the truth, we're walking into a nightmare." Moore nodded. "Let's end it." Their headlights pierced the night, heading back to the lab. They parked a block away from the lab. The building looked asleep, but Scout's growl said otherwise. Harris adjusted her jacket. "No alarms. We go quiet." Moore handed her a flashlight. Scout trotted ahead, low and silent. The air felt like it was holding its breath. Inside, the lab smelled of bleach and rust. Scout led them past overturned chairs and shattered glass. Harris kept her voice low. "Something went down here." They followed Scout into the stairwell. The walls were smeared. "Blood?" Moore whispered. Scout stopped, ears back. The basement door creaked open. Scout refused to go further, teeth bared. Harris stepped in first. The air was colder, heavier. Lights flickered overhead. "This isn't just a lab," Moore muttered. Rows of restraints lined the walls. What the hell happened here? They moved deeper. A sudden clang echoed. Harris spun around, gun raised. Scout barked from the door. Someone's still here. Moore hissed. A silhouette darted past a hallway. Harris gave chase, boots slamming. Scout followed, barking louder. They lost the figure in the maze of corridors. Um, Scout sniffed frantically. Harris leaned against a wall, breathing hard. Whoever it was, they know we're here. Moore nodded grimly. This wasn't abandoned, it was bait. Scout growled. Trap, Harris whispered. Scout led them toward a metal door at the end of the hall. It was ajar. Inside, monitors glowed faintly, showing security footage, some live. Harris leaned in. They're watching us. Moore's hands trembled. One screen showed the parking lot. Their car. We've been tracked. Suddenly, the monitors cut to black. A siren wailed. Red lights bathed the hallway. Go, Harris shouted. They ran. Scout sprinted ahead, barking. Doors slammed behind them, metal clashing. Moore tripped, but Scout circled back, nudging him up. The lab had come alive. They burst into a new chamber, rows of empty cages, tags with names. Scout froze, growling low. Harris scanned the room. These weren't animals. Moore read a label. Subject 14, Phase 3. He looked pale. Scout barked sharply, warning. Something moved in the dark. From the darkness, a figure emerged, disheveled, barefoot, terrified. Scout didn't growl. Harris lowered her weapon. Are you hurt? The woman nodded slowly. Moore wrapped his jacket around her. We need to get her out. Scout turned, barking toward the exit. The sirens stopped. Silence pressed on them. Scout stiffened, ears twitching. Harris held the woman close. Moore checked the hallway. Too quiet. A thud echoed behind them. Scout spun around, growling. They're not done. Harris whispered, something else is coming. The lights flickered and died. Total darkness. Harris clicked her flashlight. Nothing. Moore's voice trembled. It's not just a power cut. Scout barked once, then silence. A breath close behind them. Harris spun, gun raised. Who's there? No answer, just cold air. Scout lunged to the dark. Teeth bared. A cry rang out. A man falling. Lights blinked back to life. A figure in a lab coat lay unconscious, trank gun beside him. Harris stepped forward. He was waiting. Moore stared. For us? Scout growled. Not just him. Moore searched the scientist's pockets. Keycards, maps, a USB. Look at this. Harris scanned the map. There's another exit. Scout barked twice, as if confirming. The rescued woman pointed to a spot. I remember that room. Hope flickered. They had a plan. They moved fast, passing empty labs and darkened corridors. Scout kept pace, ears flicking, always alert. Harris held the woman's hand tight. Moore watched their backs. The exit loomed ahead, steel and heavy. Scout stopped suddenly, growling low. Something blocked the way. A silhouette stepped into the light. Another scientist, armed. You shouldn't have come here. Harris aimed. Move, he laughed. You have no idea what's down there. Moore whispered, we're not leaving without answers. Scout's growl deepened. The man didn't flinch. The scientist raised his gun, but before he could fire, Scout lunged. Teeth met flesh. Weapon clattered to the floor. Harris kicked it away. Moore restrained the man. Blood dripped, but no one hesitated. He was going to kill us. The rescued woman nodded. He's one of them. Scout sniffed ahead, then barked sharply. The exit door had a keypad. Moore swiped the card, a beep, Red light denied. He tried again, still locked. We're trapped. Harris grabbed the scientist. Open it, he laughed. Only one man has that code. Silence fell. Moore scanned the USB they found. Inside, logs, camera feeds, names. There's someone deeper inside. Room Z3. The rescued woman's face paled. That's where they kept the failures. Harris checked her weapon. Then we go there. Scout barked once. No hesitation. Z3 was colder, the lights dimmer. Cages lined the walls. Scout sniffed the air. His fur bristled. Inside one cage, a figure stirred. Help me! It was barely human. Harris stepped back. Moore whispered, what did they do here? Scout whined. Even he felt the horror. A noise behind them, footsteps. Scout turned, growling. A man in a black coat emerged. You've gone too far. Harris aimed. Who are you? He smirked. I created them. Moore stepped forward. Then you'll answer for it. Scout bared his teeth. The final confrontation began. The man raised his hands, stepping closer. You don't understand. This project was meant to save humanity. Harris scoffed. By torturing people. The creature in the cage whimpered. Scout barked furiously. Moore held Harris back. Let's hear it. The man's eyes glinted. They were dying anyway? The man said. We gave them purpose, strength. Harris growled. You played God. Scout snapped his jaws. Moore looked at the monitors. This data? You injected animals too? The man nodded. You've already met one. Silence. All eyes on Scout. Scout stepped back, eyes wide. Harris crouched beside him. Is that true? And the man nodded. We enhanced him, but he chose his own path. Moore looked down at Scout. That's why you're different. Scout didn't move. Only his eyes, full of pain and understanding, spoke. Suddenly, a siren blared. Containment breach, a voice echoed. Moore turned to the door, locks disengaging. Something's coming. The man in black smirked. You shouldn't have opened Z3. Harris grabbed Scout. Stay close. The lights flickered. Heavy steps approached. The door burst open. Smoke rolled in. A hulking figure stepped through, stitched together like a nightmare. Scout growled low. Harris and Moore raised their weapons. What is that? Moore asked. Our final prototype, the man said. And it doesn't obey anyone. The creature growled, its massive limbs creaking as it moved. Scout barked fiercely, stepping in front of Harris. Moore stepped back, eyes wide. That's not possible. The creature lunged, but Scout was faster. He bit its leg, causing it to stagger. Go now, Harris shouted. Harris grabbed Moore's arm. We need to move now! The creature roared, shaking its head. Scout leaped onto its back, biting its shoulder. It howled in pain. Moore turned to Harris. Where's the exit? She pointed down the corridor. At the end, through the hatch. The corridor was long and the creature was relentless. It pushed forward, ignoring the pain from Scout's attack. Harris and Moore ran, but Scout was falling behind, growling as he kept pace. Come on, Harris shouted, turning to see Scout limping. You can do it. They reached the hatch, but the creature was nearly upon them. Moore began to lift the hatch, but it wouldn't budge. It's stuck, he shouted. Scout growled, his body tense. Harris pulled a small device from her belt, activating it. The hatch clicked open. Go! Harris shouted as Moore squeezed through first. Scout hesitated for a moment, his instincts fighting the pain in his leg, but then He pushed forward, jumping through the hatch just as the creature reached the doorway. The hatch slammed shut behind them. The group was now in a small, dimly lit room. Harris panted, her breath coming in short gasps. Moore collapsed against the wall, exhausted. Scout stood still, his ears perked. The silence in the room was deafening. "Is it gone?" Moore asked, looking toward the door. A loud thump echoed from the hallway, making them all freeze. Scout's ears twitched, and he barked once, low and warning. Harris motioned for everyone to stay quiet. "We need to move now," she whispered. Moore nodded, but fear was visible in his eyes. Harris reached for the door handle, but before she could turn it, another sound, louder this time, echoed in the hallway. The creature was close, too close. "We need to find another way out," she said urgently. Moore and Scout both nodded, ready to follow her lead. Harris pointed toward a vent in the far corner of the room. "Through there. It leads outside." Moore hesitated. "It's small," he said, looking at Scout. Harris nodded. "Scout can fit. We'll go after him." Scout wagged his tail, sensing the plan. Scout crawled into the vent, his body sleek and agile, despite the pain in his leg. Harris followed closely, and then Moore, just barely fitting through the small opening. Behind them, the sound of the creature's growls grew louder. They had no time to waste. As they crawled through the tight space, Harris could hear the creature's footsteps echoing behind them. The vent was narrow and they had to move quickly. Scout's ears were flat against his head, his body tense with every sound. They were running out of time. Suddenly, Harris stopped. "This way," she whispered, pointing to a larger opening in the vent. They all squeezed through, barely fitting. The sound of the creature was deafening now, its breath close enough to feel. Harris quickly led them toward the only exit she could find. The trio reached the end of the vent. Harris pushed against a small grate, the fresh air from outside flooding into the narrow passage. She smiled with relief, but knew they weren't safe yet. The growls from the creature echoed even louder. "Hurry," she urged. They climbed out into a narrow alley behind an abandoned building. Scout immediately took a defensive stance, scanning the surroundings. Harris and Moore followed, breathing heavily, but the danger wasn't over. "We have to keep moving," Harris said. Suddenly, a loud screech pierced the night. The creature had found them. Harris looked at Moore and then to Scout. "We finish this now," she whispered. Scout growled, ready to defend them. With no more options, they turned to face their greatest challenge.